Welcome back to English Through Wisdom. I hope you learned something valuable from our last lesson. It is wonderful to have you here again today.
The rain had not stopped in 3 days, and Arav Mehta had not slept in 4. He sat in the back seat of a car that cost more than most people's houses, watching the wipers fight a losing battle against the mountain storm. And he realized, somewhere between the 40th and 50th switchback, that he could not remember the last time he had felt anything at all. Not joy, not fear, not even the low, familiar hum of ambition that had carried him for 30 years. Like a current he never had to question. Just tired, endlessly, bottomlessly tired. "We're close, sir," the driver said, glancing at him in the mirror. "The monastery is just past this ridge." Arav didn't answer. He was looking at his own reflection in the window, superimposed over the blurred green of the hillside, and he did not recognize the man looking back. The Empire of One. 3 weeks earlier, he had collapsed in a boardroom in Mumbai. Not dramatically, not with sirens and stretchers, just a quiet graying at the edges of his vision, a numbness in his left hand. A doctor afterward who used the words stress and warning in the same sentence, the way physicians do when they are trying not to frighten a man who frightens everyone else. He owned 4 companies. His name appeared on the covers of business magazines with words like visionary and titan stitched beneath his photograph. He had a penthouse in Worli with views of the sea, a home in London he visited twice a year, a marriage that had quietly ended in all but paperwork, and a teenage daughter who now called him Sir as a joke that wasn't really a joke. He had everything he had spent 3 decades acquiring, and at 2 in the morning, alone in a $50 million apartment, he had lain on the cold marble of his bathroom floor because it was the only place in the entire home that felt honest. His assistant had suggested the retreat. Not spiritual guidance exactly. A break, she'd called it. A place in the hills where wealthy, exhausted people went to remember how to breathe. He had agreed only because his doctor threatened to hospitalize him otherwise. He had not expected a monk. 2. Walk with me. The old man was waiting at the gate when the car finally arrived, as though he had known the exact minute Arav would appear, though there had been no message sent ahead. He wore simple gray robes, worn thin at the elbows, and his feet were bare against the wet stone. He did not bow. He did not offer tea or introduce himself with a title. He simply looked at Arav for a long moment, the way one looks at a familiar illness, and said, "Walk with me before you ask questions." Arav opened his mouth to explain that he had driven 6 hours, that he had a call with Singapore in the morning, that he had come for guidance, not exercise. But something in the old man's stillness made the words dissolve before they reached his tongue. So he walked. Third, what the mountain taught. The first morning, the monk led him past a small stream where 3 children were playing, barefoot, soaked to the bone, shrieking with a joy so complete it looked almost violent. They had nothing, no shoes, no toys that Arav could identify, just water and each other, and the immense luxury of a morning with nowhere to be. Arav watched them and felt something crack quietly in his chest, though he could not have named what it was. "They have nothing," he said. The monk did not look away from the children. "They have this moment. Tell me which is worth more." Arav had no answer. On the second day, They sat beneath a banyan tree and watched a flock of myna birds tearing at the soil for insects, oblivious to the storm clouds building on the horizon. They did not build shelters in advance. They did not hoard. When evening came, they would simply find a branch and rest, trusting, in whatever thoughtless way birds trust, that tomorrow would provide. They don't plan, Arav said. There was an edge of contempt in his voice now, the frustration of a man who had built an empire on planning, on 5-year strategies and quarterly forecasts. That's not wisdom. That's just ignorance. The monk smiled for the first time. Or perhaps they simply understand something you've forgotten, that tomorrow was never actually theirs to control. On the third day, they passed an old farmer bent nearly double over a small plot of vegetables, his hands cracked and dark from a lifetime of sun, and yet he was humming, badly and happily, some tune that had no melody Arav could recognize. Arav could not contain himself any longer. I didn't come here for parables about birds and farmers. I have a company hemorrhaging money in 3 countries. I have a board that wants me removed. I have a daughter who hasn't hugged me since she was 9 years old. I need real advice. I need an answer. The monk poured him a cup of tea in silence, the steam rising between them like a small, patient ghost, and said nothing at all until the cup was empty. Then he stood, brushed the dust from his robes, and walked on. Arav sat alone with the birds and his own fury for a long time before he followed. The breaking. By the 4th night, something in Arav had worn through completely. He found the monk sitting alone outside the small stone temple, eyes closed, hands resting open on his knees, as though waiting to receive something invisible. "Enough," Arav said, and his voice cracked in a way it had not cracked in 30 years of boardrooms and shareholder calls. "I've built more in 1 decade than most men build in 3 lifetimes. I've read every book. I've hired every consultant. I've meditated with apps on my phone at 2 in the morning like a desperate fool. Tell me the secret. I have wasted enough time already." The monk opened his eyes. There was no pity in them. No judgment either. Only a terrible, gentle clarity. The look of a man who had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. He spoke 7 words, quietly, the way one might hand someone something fragile. "Nothing outside you can complete you forever." The silence that followed was enormous. Arav laughed first, a short, disbelieving bark of a laugh. "That's it? That's the great wisdom? I flew across the country for a fortune cookie." The monk said nothing. He simply watched Arav's face the way one watches weather change. And slowly, the laughter died. Arav sat down heavily on the stone steps, and for the first time since the boardroom, since the marble floor at 2 in the morning, since perhaps his own childhood, he let himself feel the full weight of what the monk had said. He thought of the penthouse he had bought after his first 100 million, and how empty it had felt within a month. He thought of the company he had sold for a fortune, and how the euphoria had lasted exactly 9 days before the next target appeared on the horizon. He thought of his daughter's face at 9 years old, waiting by the door for a birthday he had missed for a merger call, and how he had told himself that one time, just this once, we will make it up later. There had never been a later. There had only ever been the next thing. For 30 years, He had been trying to fill something bottomless with things that had a bottom. He put his face in his hands, and the old monk sat beside him, saying nothing, offering nothing but the quiet fact of his presence, which, Arav realized through his tears, was the first thing in years that had actually felt like enough. The return. He did not quit his company. He did not give away his fortune or shave his head or vanish into the hills, the way people in stories sometimes do when they discover they have been living wrong. He simply began to live differently, in small, almost invisible ways. He ate his meals without his phone on the table. He listened to his daughter's stories about a boy at school without checking his watch. And one evening, without warning, without asking, she hugged him, briefly, the way she had when she was small, and neither of them mentioned it, because some moments are too fragile for commentary. He began arriving early to meetings not to dominate them, but to sit quietly for 5 minutes beforehand, remembering that the people across the table were not obstacles, but human beings with their own hidden exhaustion. He gave money away, quietly, without press releases, to a school in the same hills where he had met the monk, and told no one because he finally understood that the version of giving that requires an audience was never really giving at all. His revenue that year barely changed. Everything else did. The last image. Years later, when a journalist asked him what had changed him, expecting a story about a merger or a mentor or a book, Rav simply described an old man in gray robes pouring tea in silence, and 7 words spoken on a cold mountain evening. The journalist waited for him to elaborate, the way people always do when they suspect there must be more to a story than what they've been given. But Arav only smiled, the way the monk once had, and said nothing further, because he had finally learned the one lesson that cannot be taught through explanation, only through the long, quiet accumulation of a life lived differently. Some truths are not meant to be summarized. They are meant to be carried. If everything you have been chasing finally became yours tomorrow, would you actually feel complete? Or would you simply start chasing something else?
If you enjoyed learning English through this ancient saying, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need this wisdom today. Until next time, keep learning English and keep collecting wisdom from around the world.